Good morning, honorable members. As we begin our devotions this morning with our Moments of Impact segment, I would like to share on this thought today, overcoming anxiety. Anxiety is a feeling of worry, stress, nervousness, unease, typically about an imminent event or something with an uncertain outcome. All of us at some point in time in our lives have battled with some level of anxiety. From the seat I sit in, I can say unequivocally that anxiety is at an all-time high in just about every sphere of society. There are many different types of anxiety that people are faced with. Financial anxiety, relational anxiety, familial anxiety, health anxiety, and of course, political anxiety. Let me state here, though, emphatically, that anxiety is not of God. The source of all anxiety is Satan. I want to highlight two reasons why it's important to overcome anxiety. Number one, anxiety robs you of your peace, your joy, and your happiness. And number two, anxiety leads to depression. In my concluding thoughts, let me hasten to say, prayer is the key to overcoming anxiety. Philippians chapter 4, verse 6 and 7 says, "Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God." And verse 7 says, "And the peace of God that passeth all understanding will guard your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus." Today, my encouragement to you is to leave your anxieties in the hands of Almighty God and allow His peace to come upon you. Selah, think and act on these things. Bow your hearts with me. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for the gift of life. Lord, we give you all of our anxieties today. You said in your word that we can cast all of our cares upon you because you cared for us. And so today, every concern that weigh our hearts down, we release them unto you today. You said in your word that we may boldly come before the throne of grace to find help in the time of need. Lord, we need you today. Lord, I lift up these honorable members, God, and you know what they're going through beyond the facade, beyond the smiles. You know their anxieties. You know their concerns. You know the things they are worrying about. But Lord, I come praying on their behalf today to grant them your peace that passeth all understanding. May that be their portion today. Father, I pray that you will show yourself strong on behalf of these honorable members. And oh God, we ask that you would bless the proceedings today. Grant these honorable members with wisdom from on high to make the right decisions. And may both sides work together for the greater good of our nation. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Let us repeat the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.
Glennis Hannah Martin, Obadiah Wilchcomb, Alfred Sayers, Dr. Michael Darbo, Clay Sweeting, Keith Bell, Wayne Monroe, Vaughn Miller, Jobeth Colby Davis, Ginger Moxley, Mario Bolag, Jomo Campbell, Basil McIntosh, Miles LaRoda, Pia Glover Roll, Lisa Ramming, Vane Lightbourne, Dr. Hubert Minish, Jamal Strawn, John Pinder, Marcus Roll, Leon Lundy, Kirk Cornish, Wade Watson, Leonardo Lightbourne, Lesnia Miller Bryce, Leroy Major, Sylvanus Petty, Mikkel Bonnaby, Michael Pintard, James Kwesi Thompson, Aram Lewis, Shannon Don Cartwright, Adrian Gibson, Adrian White.
Thank you. Good morning, honorable members. Before we go down the order of business, I would just like to take a few minutes as I congratulate the newest bishop assigned to the world, assigned to me, and assigned to this honorable assembly. As of November 22nd, we are now blessed with a bishop. So I'd like us to congratulate our chaplain, who is now consecrated to the position of bishop. He is now Bishop Valentino Williams. Didn't I say he was the creme de la creme? Yes, he is. I would also like to formally thank those members who, from my trip that I paid for St. Anne's, okay, and me and the whole team paid for our trip, okay? We were in Atlanta, and we were so privileged to be a part of the launch of Michelle Obama's book, but that wasn't our only reason for being there. So I want to congratulate the members of our diaspora there at the Atlanta's office and say a special thank you to them. And I want to say a special thank you to Holly Paris, who is Vice Counsel of Political Affairs there. I want to say a special thank you to Tyson McKinsey, who is the Deputy Counsel General there, Duran Saunders, who is Vice Counsel of Public Affairs, and Kayla Smith, who is Vice Counsel of Economic and Commercial Affairs. It was our privilege and honor as women to sit with representatives of the capital assigned to Atlanta, and it was a complete honor to be among them as women who in Parliament who represent this country. So we were not just there for book signings, we were there on business. So I want to say thank you to them that they made our stay a very, very pleasurable. They are consummate professionals, and they made sure that their country was represented and represented well. I would also like to take this time to mention the passing of Karen Johnson, and I'd like to give condolences on behalf of this honorable place and the honorable members of this lower house to our member who was assigned to the upper house, Senator Randy Roll. And if you get an opportunity, please reach out to him, because the death was very sudden on the passing of his mother. And we would like to just let him know that we give him our prayers and our support, and our thoughts are with him at this time. I had the opportunity to speak with him yesterday. He's in a lot of pain. He's hurting over this. So I want us to give him our full support. And last but not least, honorable member for Fort Charlotte. I know we have been taking a lot of blows, but I want to say, and I brought my phone and I'm going to send it out directly thereafter, that when people do well, I like to always remember and point out the good that they do, because people are always willing to point out the bad. I got out of my bed at 6 a.m. and there I met on my phone, when most persons should have been resting with their families on a Sunday, from Engineer Bahai. And she was messaging me to let me know that she was sending a team out on Sunday morning to identify some areas in Bamboo Town. And she gave me the name listing of the areas. And before I could even rest myself, I sent her another note on some things that I saw on Facebook and some other social media sites. And to my surprise, she was already on it, her and Chief Engineer Clark, along with Bahama Mix. So I want to say to Bamboo Town that these engineers are working. They're not just here to take care of one constituency, but they have not just Nassau, but they have the family of islands that they man. They have a mammoth job. Just bear with them. I know there are a lot of potholes because I drive through my community every other day, and I drove through some of the areas, and I see the hurt, and I know what you're going through. So I just want you to bear with us, because I'm certain that Angliston and Carmichael and Baines and Grantstown and so many other areas have these very same issues. But I want you to know that these engineers are working. They're not just sitting down, and they have promised that not just that weekend pass, every weekend. So they're working 7 days a week to make sure that we are taken care of. So I want to say thank you to them, and thank you, because they are making it happen. And I just thought that I should express that from this chair, because I am very proud of them. I'm very proud of the team. So thank you, Minister, for making sure that we have the best engineers. I want you to know that Engineer Clark, Engineer Moxie, and Engineer Bahai, I know them personally. I may not come to you direct, but these people treat me with the utmost professionalism, and they make things happen. So I just wanted to say that in aid of them. Thank you. So let's get on now with the people's business and our assignment for today. And I see that we will be dealing with disaster risk management today. And let's stay on course, because I am certain that Grand Bahama and Abaco is looking forward to what we have to say. So I'm determined to hear some relief for them. So let's stay on course. Okay, honorable members? Thank you, honorable members. And now we go down the order of business. Introduction and swearing in of new members. Laying of documents by ministers.
Madam Speaker.
The chair recognizes the honorable member for Grand Bahama and Bimini.
Madam Speaker, I beg leave to lay on the table of the House a copy of the following: the Industries Encouragement Approved Product, Pieces of 8, Winnie Limited, Order 2022.
Thank you, honorable member. Order that the document be brought up. Thank you. Order that the document do lie on the table. Further lay.
Madam Speaker,
Continue, honorable member.
I beg leave to lay on the table of the House a copy of the following: the Industries Encouragement Approved Manufacturers, Pieces of 8, Winery Limited, Order 2022.
Thank you, honorable member. Order that the document be brought up. Order the document do lie on the table. Thank you. For the laying of documents?
Madam Speaker, I beg leave to lay on the table of the House a copy of the following: the Price Control Application to Additional Items, Number 2, Regulations 2022.
Thank you, honorable member. Order that the document be brought up. Order that the document do lie on the table. For the lay?
Madam Speaker, I beg leave to lay on the table of the House a copy of the following: the Price Control General Amendment Number 16, Regulations 2022.
Thank you, honorable member. Order that the document be brought up. Order the document do lie on the table. Further laying of documents?
No further layers.
Thank you, honorable member. Statement and communications by ministers?
None, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, honorable member. Communications by the clerk? Messages from the Governor General? Messages from the Senate? Motion for leave of absence, leave to resign, seat and new writs? Presentations of petitions? Presentations of reports of committees? Adoption of reports of committees? First reading of bills?
None, Madam Speaker.
Second reading and committal of bills? The chair recognizes the honorable member for Pinewood.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I rise on behalf the great people of the Pinewood constituency, whom I'm eternally grateful for their support over this past year, and whose debt I could never repay. Madam Speaker, like you, I would like to offer condolences to Senator Randy Roll on the passing of his mother, Karen, who I know very well. Madam Speaker, we all remember election season, or the leading up to that. Randy would have been my worthy opponent in Pinewood. We have always been friends, we remain friends, and even in our fight for the nomination, both Randy and Karen was always cordial towards me, even accepting one of my shirts and hats, even though she would not have worn it during that battle. I still treasure our friendship from her days at Davis & Co. Further, Madam Speaker, I'd like to offer condolences to my lunch bunch buddy, Steve Hasty, on the passing of his wife yesterday. She was in a coma, and finally, the late Boogaloo Elliott. I found out last night, this morning, from his nephew, Ralph Dean, that he also passed. And may their souls rest in peace.
Yes.
Madam Speaker, with regards to Pinewood, this is the Christmas season. There are events that are planned, our Christmas tree lighting and kid toys giveaway and festivities would be on the 17th, Saturday the 17th of December. Also, we have a function for the elderly at the Pinewood Urban Renewal, where we will provide food, drinks, gifts, and a special gift to the Urban Renewal Center itself that is in need of certain equipment. Madam Speaker, finally, I would also like you thank the honorable member for Charlotte as it relates to his ministry's timely dealing with some lighting, some pothole problems, and also the drainage. I must say that, we criticize in this place, and sometimes it's warranted because we all in this place have our issues, we have our anxieties, and there are times even when colleagues have to speak up for our community, because ultimately they are the people that we represent. And it's never in malice, but to bring attention to certain needs that are in our community that are very vexing.
Yes.
And so sometimes we have to be politically matured in this place. I have been on both sides, where a member is speaking out for the thousands of people that he represents, that we don't want lost in the personality, the message that is there. We are the honorable member for Charlotte in terms of assistance in my road paving, I-95, in terms of my drainage cleaning, in terms of my potholes, in terms of lighting. He's been, his ministry has been very efficient, and for that, I am very grateful. Madam Speaker, this is a landmark piece of legislation. We have had, as it relates to disaster, risk management, and reduction, in the past, we have had an ad hoc regime. We have had NEMA, we have had the Ministry of Disaster and Reconstruction, we have had the DRA. And Madam Speaker, while all of those areas would have had their strengths, it is the position of this government that we should have a more nimble, agile regime as it relates to disaster risk management. I've said this over and over again. Gone are the days when you just hire the old fire chief to be in charge. Risk management and resilience is a 12-month, 7 days a week job now. Thank God we got through the hurricane season with minimal damage and no loss of life. We don't know what next year would bring. We can hope and pray to Almighty God for his continued blessing of our nation. But in all countries, Madam Speaker, there is also personal responsibility, and that responsibility lies on the government to ensure that there's a regime in place, that our agencies are in place, that funding are in place, just in the event that we experience another disaster that usually comes in the form of hurricane. And it's not if, Madam Speaker. We know that it's only a matter of time before we are faced with another disaster, and hopefully this piece of legislation will go a long way in putting the Bahamas in a better position to deal with the effects. Madam Speaker, I'm honored to lead this debate on Disaster Risk Management Bill 2022, a bill for an act to provide for a more effective and comprehensive disaster risk management policy and framework through establishing a disaster risk management authority and for connected matters. Once implemented, the act will mark a significant step in our country's development. Approval of the legislation will provide for a more effective and comprehensive disaster risk management policy that, in addition to preserving the good practices of existing legal framework, features the following quality attributes, among others. 1, the establishment of a responsibility framework on DRM for all government level and DRM processes. 2, establish a comprehensive set of instruments to implement the DRM policy. 3, the coordination and articulation of the DRM policy are to be carried out at a hierarchical level equal or higher than. 4, the articulation of DRM policy with other sustainable development-related policies such as climate change adaptation, water resources management, and land use planning. 5, the mandate to develop comprehensive financial strategy for DRM. 6, establish a national prevention fund that provides budgetary incentives for public bodies and local government to implement ex-ante DRM activities. 7, establishing a mechanism for civil society participation is applicable to DRM. Before drawing attention to some features of the Disaster Risk Management Bill 2022, I would like to provide remarks on the importance of this proposed legislation. Madam Speaker, the Bahamas is one of the countries in Latin America and the Caribbean and that has historically experienced the most significant number of climate disasters. There have been 14 significant disasters in the past 20 years, Madam Speaker, mainly due to hurricanes. These have included Hurricanes Joaquin in 2015, Matthew in 2016, Irma in 2017, and Dorian 2019, with total damages in excess of $104.8 million, $438.6 million, $200 million, and $4.3 billion, respectively. Hurricane Dorian is still fresh in our minds. It took many lives, displaced many more, and devastated livelihoods and properties. Hurricane Dorian continues to remind all Bahamians of the critical task ahead to build the resilience of the Bahamian society and protect the country and its people from future disasters. Madam Speaker, adopting a robust disaster risk management governance framework is essential to ensure that a nation is resilient to disasters. This is acknowledged by the UN Sendai Framework Agreement for Disaster Risk Reduction 2015 to 2030, signed by the Bahamas in 2015. The Sendai Framework aims to substantially reduce disaster risk and losses in lives, livelihoods, health, and the economic, physical, social, cultural, and environmental assets of persons, businesses, communities, and countries by 2030. Included in the framework as a second priority for action is strengthening disaster risk management governance for resilience. Madam Speaker, to measure the existence of governance conditions that facilitate the implementation of effective public policies in disaster risk management, the Inter-American Development Bank developed in 2012 the Index on DRM Governance and Public Policy, IGOP. It has been applied regularly in 26 Latin American and Caribbean countries, including the Bahamas. The United Nations have endorsed it as an indicator for measuring the progress of a country in Sendai Framework's second priority for action. The IGOP is measured in percentage terms, with 0% and 100% being the lowest and highest scores, respectively, with higher score corresponding with better disaster risk management governance. Madam Speaker, studies by the IDB have found that on average, a governance improvement of 1% measured in terms of the IGOP score is associated with a 3% reduction in human losses and reduces economic losses by 6%. The main expected impact of the proposed legislation is strengthening the country's DRM governance. DRM governance in the Bahamas will be measured using the IGOP. On a scale of 0 to 100%, the Bahamas scored 22% in the IGOP application. This proposed legislation is expected to increase that score to 39%. A robust DRM governance framework requires legal, institutional, and budgetary conditions that facilitate the implementation of an effective DRM policy. It is key to effectively using human, technical, financial, and material resources to address the risks and consequences of natural disasters. The government's manifesto, our blueprint for change, proposes a 10-point action plan for the short and medium terms. The 10-point action plan includes, at point 3, reconstruction and resilience, and point 10, national development. These are aligned with the mandate to strengthen the governance framework for disaster risk management. Acknowledging that the current governance arrangement in the Bahamas are not optimal for the effective implementation of the DRM policy, the government authorized the Office of the Attorney General and the Ministry of Legal Affairs to collaborate with the National Emergency Management Agency, NEMA, and the Disaster Reconstruction Authority, DRA, to draft legislation aimed at developing, promoting, and implementing an approach to disaster risk management that is holistic, comprehensive, integrated, and proactive in lessening the socio-economic and environmental impacts of disasters, including climate change. Madam Speaker, I would like to thank those agencies, in particular, the Office of the Attorney General and the Legal Reform Commission, who have worked tirelessly. This piece of legislation is time sensitive, and as I would explain later on, is tied to IDB funding. And so those agencies, along with NEMA and DRA, have worked hard to get us to this place. And even at this point, I'd like to thank the member from Marco City, who, when I spoke to the importance of getting this piece of legislation, have been very accommodating from the opposition side, understanding the importance of this for us to get this legislation passed and on to the upper house and for signature. And so I'd just like to thank those individuals. Following this decision by the government, a request was made to the Inter-American Development Bank to provide technical support to draft the said legislation. Subsequently, the Ministry of Finance requested a policy-based loan series to support this legal reform. As part of the governance framework, a new act will establish a new entity, the Disaster Risk Management Authority, to coordinate the policy's implementation and the responsibilities of other stakeholders like other public bodies. As indicated in Part 4 of the bill, the authority will be a corporate body responsible for disaster risk management in the Bahamas. It will be headed by a managing director appointed by the Prime Minister, who shall be the authority's chief executive. The Disaster Risk Management Authority will continue to build and enhance institutional capacity, increase community awareness and participation, and enhance stakeholder linkages. It will expand training opportunities in various disaster management disciplines and improve public education and awareness campaigns. The agency will collaborate with all stakeholders to conduct simulation exercises and drills at the national, district, and community levels, including schools and businesses. The agency will lead a team dedicated to developing a population that wholeheartedly understands and participates in disaster risk reduction initiatives. Madam Speaker, Part 3 of the bill provides for the National Disaster Risk Management Policy, namely the set of decisions approved by the government to address issues related to disaster risk. This policy provides an overall guiding framework or principles benchmark on best practices in disaster risk management for addressing the level of disaster risk in the Bahamian society. The policy seeks to promote priority measures to alleviate existing vulnerability to hazards and equally essential steps to ensure future development processes and programs strengthen resilience. Madam Speaker, Part 3 of the bill sets out 14 instruments of the disaster risk management policies. These are: 1, Disaster Risk Management Plan; 2, Disaster Emergency Plan; 3, Public Body Plan; 4, Local Plans; 5, Plans to include a baseline of disaster risk; 6, Comprehensive Financial Strategy for Disaster Risk Management; 7, National Disaster Emergency Operations Center; 8, National Disaster Coordination Protocols; 9, the National Disaster Risk Information System; 10, National Network of Hazard Monitoring Forecasting Systems; 11, National Early Warning System; 12, Disaster Emergency Fund; 13, Disaster Prevention Fund; and 14, the National Humanitarian Assistance Standards. Madam Speaker, a fundamental aspect of these instruments are outlined in the bill. One of the instruments mandated for the implementation in the new DRM Act, the National Disaster Risk Information System. Madam Speaker, the IDB has been a development partner of the Bahamas for many years, and it has agreed to assist the Bahamas with implementing the Disaster Risk Management Bill 2022. Once it is enacted, this assistance will include the following: an assessment of institutional capacities of key actors to comply with the mandates established by the new legislation, including prioritization of actions to strengthen said capacities. 2, education and engagement of main stakeholders, ministries, departments, agencies, local government, and the general public on the new DRM Act. 3, formulation of a comprehensive financial management strategy for DRM based on the benchmarking defined for disaster risk reduction. 4, the development of the national humanitarian assistance standards that consider the unique needs of persons who are vulnerable on account of their age, gender, disability, poverty, lack of resources, or physical displacement. 5, the National Disaster Risk Management Information System designs includes the system structure, administration process, data exchange procedures between the system and data generators, and public access protocols. Madam Speaker, the IDB and other development partners have been supporting the Bahamas in its efforts to increase resiliency to disaster and climate change. Reducing vulnerability to global challenges such as climate change is an important priority. The Act will be the legal foundation in the Bahamas for a robust reform agenda to strengthen the institutional capacity for disaster risk management and to integrate disaster risk reduction and climate change adoption in planning and investment prioritization at all levels of government. The government of the Bahamas accepts that we must do all that is necessary to ensure that comprehensive disaster management policies and strategies address all aspects of the disaster management cycle: prevention and mitigation, preparedness, response, and recovery. We also understand that those policies must involve all sectors of society, public and private, because building a culture of safety is the responsibility of everyone. Investing in preparedness and disaster risk reduction is much cheaper than in response. We must not wait for disasters to occur and then act, but take disaster risk reduction seriously. It reduces losses of lives, livelihood, and property. The bill marks a significant step in our implementation of the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction, a 15-year agreement adopted by the international community in March of 2015. Engaging all of society and ensuring broad participation in implementing disaster risk reduction measures is critical to protect people and their livelihoods from disaster risk. We believe in improving knowledge and innovation to mitigate the risks of natural hazards and building a culture of disaster resilience. The legislation also makes provisions to support a whole of government's approach to disaster risk management, especially the integration of disaster risk reduction and climate change across the different sectors and through all levels of government, through the information sharing, cooperation, and joint planning as appropriate, and to govern the declaration of disaster situation and ensure disaster response operations are adequate, and to facilitate the entry and coordination of international humanitarian assistance when required during a disaster situation, and to establish an emergency fund. Madam Speaker, features of the Disaster Preparedness and Response Act 2008 and the Disaster Preparedness Management and Reconstruction Act 2019 that are retained in the Disaster Risk Management Bill are as follows. 1, the existence of regulations establishes the coordination and articulation of policy instruments at a minister's level. Hence, in Part 1 of the interpretation, the bill defines a minister as responsible for disaster risk management. 2, the bill defines the government's responsibility for the post-disaster recovery process. This is the case in the Disaster Reconstruction Authority Act. 3, the regulations governing the preparation and response processes that establish the formulation of emergency or contingency plans at the national level as indicated in Part 2, Section 9 of the bill, the National Disaster Emergency Plan. These provisions are made in the Disaster Preparedness and Response Act 2008. 4, the existence of regulations mandating ex-ante formulation of post-disaster recovery plans as indicated in Part 2, Section 9 of the bill, the National Disaster Emergency Plan. These provisions are made in the Disaster Preparedness and Response Act of 2008. The existence of regulations that governs the preparation and responses of processes and establish the formulation of official protocols for coordinating the operations or incident command. This is in Part 2, Section 15 of the bill, National Disaster Coordinating Protocols. These provisions are made in the Disaster Preparedness and Response Act of 2008. 6, the existence of regulations establishing an interinstitutional organization at the national level for the preparation and responses. This is made in Part 4, Section 22. These provisions are made the existence of regulations to govern the process of preparation and response, establishing a mechanism or enhanced instance for the management of crisis due to disaster at the highest national political level. This is made in Part 4, Section 23, functions of the committee to be constituted as National Disaster Emergency Council. These provisions are made in the Disaster Preparedness and Response Act 2008. 8, the existence of National Disaster Risk Management regulations establishing the responsibility to inform citizens about disaster risk is provided for in Part 4, Section 30N, functions of the authority, establish and maintain National Disaster Risk Information System, and to inform citizens about disaster risk through public information, education, and activities. Madam Speaker, these provisions are made in Section 4.2G of the Disaster Preparedness Response Act 2008. The existence of regulation that govern the preparation and response processes establishing the performance of drills and simulations is provided in Section 5, Section 30X. Implement, regularly coordinate, and provide assistance to local government entities and public bodies on the conduct of drills and simulation. These provisions are made in the Disaster Preparedness and Response Act in the second schedule, the agreement establishing SEDEMA, that has the force of law in the Bahamas. 10, the existence of regulations governing the preparation and response of processes to establish the formulation of emergency or contingency plans at the level of territorial management units. 11, the existence of regulations governing the preparation and response processes provide for coordination bodies in the territory. The agreement establishing the Caribbean Disaster Emergency Management Agency, CDEMA, is detailed in the second schedule of the bill. CDEMA has the following objectives: mobilizing and coordinating disaster relief, mitigating or eliminating, as far as practicable, the immediate consequences of disasters in participating states. 2, provide immediate and coordinated response using emergency disaster relief to any affected participating state. 3, securing, coordinating, and providing to interested intergovernmental and non-governmental organizations reliable and comprehensive information on disasters affecting any participating state. Encouraging the adoption of disaster loss reduction, mitigation policies and practices at the national and regional level. Encouraging cooperation, management, and mechanisms to facilitate the development of a culture of disaster loss reduction, and coordinating the establishment, enhancement, and maintenance of adequate emergency disaster response capabilities among participating states. Madam Speaker, we would know from our various hurricanes, the Bahamas have either been assisted by or have rendered assistance to our sister countries in the Caribbean who would have suffered through the various hurricanes. We know that that assistance could come in the form of electrical crews who have been sent to the country to help in electricity restoration, or it could be in the forms of cash, of which we have received contributions and of which we have also made contributions. Madam Speaker, Part 6, Section 56, makes provision for the Prime Minister, upon the advice of the Inter-Ministerial Committee on Disaster Risk Management, may demand the evacuation of any person or group of persons from any specified area or land by order. You may recall when an amendment to the Disaster Preparedness and Response Act was made in November of 2019, a penalty of 1 month imprisonment or a fine not exceeding $500 or both was promulgated for any person who refuses without justifiable cause to evacuate and where such refusal is likely to imperil the life of another, imprisonment of 3 months or a fine not exceeding $1,000 or both. Madam Speaker, the Disaster Risk Management Bill makes no such provision for the imposition of a fine or imprisonment. The bill specifies that where residents within a selected area or island refuse to evacuate, no first response shall have a duty to risk life to rescue or recover any person in the specified location or island. I think that needs to be stressed, Madam Speaker. While we will not be issuing a fine for those individuals who refuse to evacuate, on the other hand, you cannot expect first responders to risk their life to save you in the event of a disaster when all of the warnings have been given out and the evacuation orders. This places the onus on individuals to heed those evacuation orders of the government. And while we cannot charge you for not evacuating, you will not have the luxury of having first responders having risked their lives to come and save you. Madam Speaker, the DRM governance is mainly legislated by the Disaster Preparedness and Response Act of 2008 and the Disaster Reconstruction Authority Act of 2019. According to analysis carried out by the IDB based on results of the IGOP, neither act provides a solid foundation to implement effective public policy in disaster risk management. Despite having some strengths, both acts still leave the country with governance gaps that hinder the efforts to build a more resilient Bahamian society to national disasters and climate change. The new act aimed to improve the country's governance of DRM. The specific objectives are to support governance improvements relating to risk identification, risk reduction, disaster preparedness, recovery planning, and financial protection. Number one, Madam Speaker, risk identification designates a national actor responsible for providing technical assistance and guidelines to public bodies and local governments for disaster risk analysis. Two, orders the creation and maintenance of a national disaster risk management information system. Three, establishes the creation, systemization, or updating of databases on the effects of disasters. Four, establish that each public body is responsible for carrying out disaster risk analysis within the scope of functions and jurisdiction. Five, formally defines critical infrastructure. Six, makes the availability of information for risk analysis mandatory and defines mechanism for its exchange. Regarding risk reduction, the bill establishes that public bodies are responsible for disaster risk reduction within the scope of their function and jurisdiction. Two, requires public bodies to reduce the vulnerability of critical infrastructure under their responsibility. Three, establishes that local governments are responsible for disaster risk reduction within the scope of their function and jurisdictions. Regarding disaster preparedness, the bill establishes the formulation of emergency plans by public bodies. Two, provides for the creation and operation of an early warning system. Three, establishes the principle of subsidiary assistance between different governmental levels. Four, authorizes local government to use their resources outside their jurisdiction in emergencies. Five, establishes that the unique needs of specific groups within the population affected by disasters must be considered in the emergency response provided by the government. Regarding the recovery planning, the bill establishes the restoration of livelihood as a purpose of post-disaster recovery. Two, establishes studies on the underlying factors of disasters to guide a resilient recovery. Three, mandates the formulation of post-disaster recovery plans that explicitly seek to reduce pre-existing vulnerabilities. Four, establish the post-disaster recovery plan must define the length of time affected homes must be repaired or rebuilt. Regarding financial protection, the bill establishes the formulation of a financial protection structure in the country. Two, establishes the policy bodies and local government must cover their public assets with insurance policies or other equivalent mechanism. Three, establishes a disaster emergency fund that can accumulate resources over time. Budget allocations is based on annualized loss expectancy and the recorded information on the losses from disasters in previous years. In conclusion, Madam Speaker, enactment of the Disaster Risk Management Act is critical. It will play an essential role in the following. Shifting the country's focus from disaster response to more proactive disaster risk reduction and preparedness. And two, enhancing the convergence between adaptation and disaster risk reduction actions. Madam Speaker, I fully support the Disaster Risk Management Bill and commend the honorable members for their favorable consideration and subsequent passage.
Thank you, Honorable Member. Is there a seconder? The chair recognizes the Honorable Member for Freetown.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Gives me great pleasure to rise in this House to second the Disaster Risk Management Bill 2022. Before I get to the details, Madam Speaker, as always, a shout out to Freetown who sent me here. I continue to love them, and most of them continue to love me. As we are in, we'll see that in 3 years' time. As we're in the Advent season, awaiting Christmas, I convey Advent greetings and Christmas greetings to all constituents. It is fortuitous that we are debating the Disaster Risk Management Bill. Risks, Madam Speaker, are a natural part of life. We must confront them every day we get up, every morning that the Lord blesses us with life. The risks that this bill addresses are singular, though, and they relate to the hazards as are defined in Section 3 of the bill. And hazard or threat in this bill means the latent danger imposed by the probable manifestation of a physical phenomenon of natural origin, which under certain conditions or exposure and vulnerability may produce adverse effect on people, physical assets, economic activity, and natural resources, and includes a natural hazard. In layman's speak, one would think of it as a storm. We are confronted with the storms of life every time we arise. And so I would be so bold to suggest, Madam Speaker, that it would not be out of order to order our approaches to the storms of life as this bill orders our approaches to natural disasters and the hazards defined thereby. Madam Speaker, and it's not just limited in the Bahamas, we would say we manage the storms of life by putting our faith in God. But a priest once told the story that there was a hurricane coming and the warning was forecast, and the homeowner says he's a good Christian, God will protect him. And as the water rose, the truck rolled by, and he said he's a good Christian and the Lord will protect him. And then when he was on his roof, the helicopter came and he said he was a good Christian and the Lord would protect him. And when he perished and was at the pearly gates, he asked, I was such a good Christian, why didn't the Lord protect me? And the response came that I sent the warning, I sent the truck, I sent the helicopter. And the point that the priest makes is that while faith is a very good and necessary thing, preparation is also important. Well, Madam Speaker, I would again hope that this is a non-controversial bill, if only because it sets a body that sets a policy. And so what is to be done is not set in stone. If I may just quickly take us to some of the sections that make that point. The act is set out quite logically, and I would encourage the public, once it's publicly available, to read it. The laws are digestible and readily understandable. The principles that are set out for the making of disaster risk management policies are set out in section 6 of the bill. And it provides that the policy that will be set is to be guided by the following principle. Firstly, the supremacy of life, security, and health of a person, his property and livelihood, and the environment. Those are the first principles set out here. The second principle is the responsibility of the government to assume financial responsibility for the risk analysis, disaster risk reduction, financial protection, preparedness for, response to, rehabilitation and recovery from disasters occurring in this country. And thirdly, the duty of the government to intervene and take responsibility for a disaster which exceeds the capacity of an administrator in the local context. And then the duty of relevant authority to take disaster risks into consideration in the formulation, approval, implementation, monitoring, and evaluation of public investment projects. Madam Speaker, if one stops there for a moment, it is very obvious that when the storm is upon you, it is a bit late to take steps to reduce the risk of adverse consequences from the storm. And so this bill speaks not just to the periods of a tropical storm watch or hurricane watch, it projects earlier before that time. And so, Madam Speaker, I know the member for Fort Charlotte to my left would say, if one is concerned, for instance, with the risk of crime and darkness, it takes some time to get LED lights delivered. It takes some time to sort that out. And so when one is complaining at the moment about darkness, that overlooks the fact that to prevent it, you have to effectively plan a year before, 18 months before, to be able to execute, to mitigate that damage. That is the type of consideration that this bill is calling for. And again, my colleague to my left, Fort Charlotte, would probably tell us that, you know, if you want to have the roads patched, you really should have 3 teams out, not when people start to complain, but 6 months ago, 12 months ago, 18 months ago. It is too late when the storm is upon you to do the things that will prevent adverse consequences. And so this bill is saying to us quite sensibly, as my colleague from Central and South, Elutra, was simply pointing out, you got to plan in advance so that the people have water. It's very simple. And so in a storm, Madam Speaker, and it is a very serious point, because in this hurricane season, one was constrained by what you met. Going forward, as a people, as a government, and by government I mean when we look at how this body is made up, that's all of us, or as they say, all of we. We have to focus, because we cannot expect, for instance, as Fort Charlotte says, if it takes 9 months or 12 months with current supply chain restraints for something to happen, when today we are thinking about what we need for the upcoming hurricane season, we must act now. And this bill, in effect, imposes an obligation for those empowered and called on to make those decisions to think in advance, not to be reactionary, but to have it in place. We know with all that's happening in the world that you don't just clip your finger and it happens. And so this bill has very serious implications for forward planning to meet the storms of life. I'm pleased, though, Madam Speaker, that a main principle, which is in F, underlines this administration's position to these things, because subparagraph F provides that a principle of the policy is the establishment and implementation of mechanisms which allow for the participation of citizens, volunteers, the public, private entities, and nonprofit organizations in the implementation of the policy. We don't think we know it all. This bill brings into the mix citizens, volunteers, and in this vein, the Ministry of Youth, Sports, and Culture is launching its it's called National Youth Guard, to train young people from various islands to be trained and available in natural disasters. This is the type of forward thinking that this Davis-Cooper administration is known for and executes. We know that you will need assistance after the storm passes. This assistance must be locally available, and we will be training young people to be able to render it when called upon in times of stress, trouble, and disaster. This is a first for this country. Also, Madam Speaker, principle which I could hear my colleague from West End and Bimini applauding greatly is that the need to have take into account the special needs of certain groups within the population affected by disasters are considered in response to a disaster. So special needs have to be considered. So that's the principles that guide the policy. One then has to execute, come up with a plan, because good intentions, they say that the road to hell is paved with good intentions. One must act on them. The act requires the development of a national disaster emergency plan. And as the minister responsible has eloquently pointed out, it expands also to public bodies, which are public companies, like the Water and Sewage Corporation, like BPL, like any other body that is set up providing public services. There also has to be plans by the local administrator. We acknowledge that everything cannot be New Providence centric. Everything cannot be done by the central government. Local persons rightly take responsibility for themselves and their localities. And so the holistic plan involves persons making that plan. And so one can readily see that Abaco, Grand Bahama, that are frequent victims to storms, may have a different outlook as to what is necessarily prophylactically to protect them than New Providence. Grand Bahama, Abaco, as we have all seen historically, can justify greater protective measures than perhaps can New Providence. And so when this bill says you take into account history and the socioeconomic circumstances, I would be so bold to suggest that we are recognizing that in this archipelago, Some are more punished than others with these storms. And this provision permits us to, when they produce their local plans, something that might seem extreme if it was being suggested for New Providence would not be extreme if it was suggested for Abaco or Grand Bahama, because historically we have seen how they have suffered. And so that justifies understanding that the risk to Abaco and Grand Bahama is different from the risk to some other parts of this country. And we are very serious when we say we look at islands individually for their development, for their progression, that even in this, addressing risk, we must be alert to this. So I applaud the minister for, in this drafting, understanding that we have to be prepared in that fashion. Now, Madam Speaker, just a few other points from the bill that I would like to highlight. One will see, and the public will see, this body called the Interministerial Committee on Disaster Risk Management, and it's in section 22. And it sets out who makes up this subcommittee of cabinet. And they are the ministers responsible for disaster risk management, which should be obvious, finance, national development planning, which is also obvious if you look at we're going to be planning ahead so that we are prepared when the storm arrives. Tourism, because that's the major driver of this country, and tourists are spread throughout the archipelago. Housing, which would be self-evident to the people of Abaco and Grand Bahama why that must be there. Transport, public work, health, agriculture, the environment, foreign affairs, public utilities, social welfare, community, communications, national security, and any other ministry which is required under any law to perform a task related to disaster risk management. When the public sees that, the public should be very aware of how serious the government takes this issue. Being very cognizant of how bureaucracy in the public sector works. All of the ministries that one would think about being necessary to properly plan for risk, plan to execute a plan to minimize risk are there. And in case someone is forgotten, any other ministry can be added. And so the approach to this, as is the approach with all things with the Davis-Cooper administration, is to be holistic from beginning to end, not simply reactionary and responsive. Madam Speaker, there is a section that I would put a marker down that we will have to look at perhaps in the committee stage, because there appears to be a wording disorder, and that is section 23, which if you read it, it talks about the function of the committee, where it says the committee shall, in A, it says advise and make recommendations, that's fine. B, report to Parliament, that's fine. C, advise the Prime Minister, that's fine. And then it just says, D says the committee shall, and if one reads it, it would say the committee shall, the designation of disaster zones, which doesn't really read properly. There's a slip somewhere there that will have to be identified and corrected. And then E, that would read the committee shall, well, E is fine because that would read the committee shall be constituted as the National Disaster Emergency Council in accordance with section 35. So, Madam Speaker, we would put down a marker that some consideration must be had for section 23, subparagraph D. Madam Speaker, the participation of ordinary citizens in assessing their risks and addressing their risks is something taken seriously by this administration. And so in section 27, one sees that in the constitution and procedure of the board, in subsection 23(3)(f), there is provision for lay representation on the board, on the Disaster Risk Management Authority Board, because it provides that not more than 7, but not more than 3 other persons representing financial, industrial, commercial, or other institution and professional organizations and members of the general public are to be appointed to the board. And so the public can be assured that in the aftermath of Dorian, when we saw yeoman effort being put forward by NGOs, by ordinary citizens, people forming themselves into groups and responding over and over again, this administration provides a place for them at the table, up front, in the planning and also in directing the execution. And again, this is a first in this country. They will be on the authority. They will be participating up front. And so one just thinks about the organizations who were very vocal, who stepped in the breach, who then, in some cases, were treated fairly flippantly. But in this bill, this government recognizes the importance and have placed them front and center and given them a place at the table. I would invite the public to read that, digest that, and understand that. And as if that were not enough, Madam Speaker, later in the bill, there's a whole part 12, that is related, and it's called Public Participation in Disaster Risk Management. That is the name of that part of the bill. And it provides that the authority shall, it has no choice, it's mandatory. The authority shall appoint a council to be known as the Non-Governmental Consultation Council. Subsection 2, the Non-Governmental Consultation Council shall consist of such number of persons selected from the following: individuals who possess qualifications, that's one thing, that's pieces of paper. Skill, which you can get from doing something, or experience, which speaks for itself, in the management of disaster risk, community-based organization, nonprofit organizations, corporations, and other private organizations who specialize in the management of disaster risk. And it says that this council shall regulate its own procedure. And it says this in section 65, the authority shall, again mandatory, when necessary, request the assistance of the Non-Governmental Consultation Council or any other person as the case may be, as the case may require, in disaster risk management. Again, persons in the community who do good and voluntary work are given a role up front and center. They aren't just taken for granted. They aren't just used when it is convenient to use them and then discard them. They are given a pride of place in this regime, which again is a first in this country. There is no other institutionalization of it. Anybody who thinks otherwise in their presentation can contradict me, and I will issue the appropriate mea culpa. But I assert that it is a first. Now, Madam Speaker, bearing in mind the time, let me just say quite quickly, the scheme of the act is of some interest to persons. And the member for Pinewood has already touched on some of the responses to disasters, particularly the evacuation orders that can be made and the consequences surrounding them. As the minister responsible for national security, it is of some moment, because this act will be in effect in the next hurricane season, that the public know what is the import and potential response of the security forces when called upon in disasters. The police force necessarily has a duty with regard policing the public. The Defense Act puts one of the missions of the Defense Force as disaster response, and it is one of their pivotal duties. The member for Pinewood has already pointed out an evacuation order, which must comply with the provisions of the Constitution and that it must be reasonable, brings with it certain consequences. He mentioned the obvious one, which is that in the midst of a storm, if you've stayed somewhere where we've told you you should go, you cannot expect people to risk their lives to come to get you. But there are other consequences, because the order itself may prohibit the movement of persons within a specified area or island. And so that is a matter that the police can enforce. It may impose a general or specific curfew, and that is a measure that can be enforced by law enforcement. It may prohibit persons in a specified area or restrict travel routes. That can be specifically enforced by law enforcement. It can demand the immediate closure of all public and private business premises, and that can be enforced by law enforcement. It can authorize any person or class of persons to render essential service of a type that that person is competent to provide and provide for reasonable compensation. What that simply means is if you are an essential service, you can be directed to provide it, and the government has a responsibility for paying you reasonable compensation so that the citizenry in that area need not worry about their pocket, need not worry about being able to afford it. The state will pay to look after the safety of its citizens, and this is specifically provided in conformity with the constitutional protection against deprivation of property without compensation. This amounts to deprivation and provide for compensation. And so if people need to be moved, evacuated, that is essential. And if in fact you are made to fly people out, you can't charge people for it. The government will pay you reasonable compensation. And so that any sort of profiteering in a disaster is mitigated and cut out. Now, Madam Speaker, my time is almost gone. So in the interest of the public, this government is already taking steps to address what we see to be risk. The public would have received during the passage of the last storm alerts over the Marcos alert system, which is a system that was commenced under the then Minister of National Security, the late Dr. Bernard Nottage. Drag, until this administration finished it and launched it. That is available now in emergencies, in disasters, to notify directly the public, and it will be used. The very next point, Madam Speaker, and it is a matter of some concern, it's been mentioned in the past, when we came to order, the police fleet was largely run down in terms of available vehicles. There have been complaints across all of the islands. And we have a fleet, I received the list for repair vehicles that are 2007 vehicles, 2010 vehicles, patrol vehicles that are run 24 hours a day. This administration, the member for Cat Island, Rumkey, and San Salvador, has approved the acquisition of a new patrol vehicle for the Royal Bahamas Police Force, which will be light trucks, which in disaster times have the clearance, the clear water, has a bed to carry a generator, to carry food, to render assistance. Such is the planning of the current Commissioner of Police, that he sees fit that the fleet of the police force will be increased by 100 light truck patrol vehicles to be distributed across the islands. Madam Speaker, this is the type of forward thinking and expenditure that the Davis-Cooper administration is concerned with in protecting our people. And for this reason, Freetown is in lockstep with this bill and is very pleased to second this bill.
Thank you, Honorable Member. It has been moved and seconded that the following bill be read a second time and committed. A bill for an act to provide for a more effective and comprehensive disaster risk management policy and framework through the establishment of the Disaster Risk Management Authority and for connected matters. As many? The chair recognizes the honorable member for Marco City.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I would like to thank God for this opportunity to be able to speak on behalf of the people of Marco City, and by extension, those Bahamians who have sent all of us to this place to consistently facilitate their dreams and aspirations, and not our own, to create an environment where they can be empowered so that we don't create or sustain a culture of patronage. It is indeed an honor, and I'm grateful to the people of Marco City and grateful, more importantly, to God. Madam Speaker, I'd like to begin just with a point of clarification. It is so ironic that the member for Freetown, in commenting on the importance of partnership and non-governmental organizations and the pivotal role that they play, he sought to make the point that this legislation is the first time stakeholders have been, in a sense, codified in law or fully integrated in legislation as having a seat at the table. I mean, obviously that's not factual. There are no doubt pieces of legislation throughout various ministries that facilitate that. The fisheries bill, for example, ensures that there are two levels of stakeholders that are intimately involved, and before all of the final major decisions are made, you hear from the stakeholders, those that we serve, with whom we collaborate in order to strengthen a sector. So this business of this is the first is so tired, and in this case, just untrue. Madam Speaker, in the aftermath of Dorian, one of the things that occurred was that the United Nations Development Program, in conjunction with the government of the Bahamas, and the government of the Bahamas benefited from University of the West Indies and other multilateral agencies that have done work in the disaster preparedness, recovery, reconstruction space, provided wonderful advice that no doubt was foundational to what we are discussing today. It dealt with the issue of partnerships and the need to codify them. It dealt with the issue of building structural capacity and looking at the issue seriously of disaster preparedness, management, and response. The partnership that I just mentioned produced several things. One, a national resilience policy, a recovery strategy and implementation plan, an organizational and institutional assessment report. All of this was developed, presented to cabinet. So Madam Speaker, this business of, this is the first time we're looking at these things is unfortunately a misrepresentation. There were 5 areas of concentration as a result of the input given by these various agencies. Among those areas of concentrations were access to infrastructure and services, institutional and capacity development, safety and security, community engagement and partnership, to be precise, and livelihood, and then, of course, economic development. So Madam Speaker, I just wanted to read that into the record in light of what was stated previously. Madam Speaker, one of the major concerns, and let me speak about my introduction to the formation of the DRA. I fundamentally held the view that governments ought to be very cautious when setting up new institutions in government, particularly under the guise, or some persons actually state, the thing that motivates us is we need institutions that could be more nimble and agile and move at a certain pace in order to accomplish what we want. The truth is that is one of the main motivating factors for the formation of the DRA, and now this new agency that subsumes the DRA and NEMA. And it would be good if we could cut through the red tape, the bureaucracy, etc. So let me say this about the motivation for forming these new structures. While it is important, given the gravity of what we face living in Hurricane Alley, we must be awfully careful as policymakers in forming these new structures that we do not fail to modernize and transform the existing ministries that have so many archaic regulations that are slow in many instances in executing on behalf of our people. And my concern, and I commit these comments to the government of the day, that this should not for a moment cause us to be beating our chests as if something monumental has been accomplished. We should really be about the business of improving the efficiency and the effectiveness of the ministries that we do have. Much of what we are talking about in this bill that we hope to accomplish, not just in terms of policy, but in terms of creating a new culture, modernizing the structure of the institutions that deal with disaster preparedness, mitigation, recovery, reconstruction. Much of the work that has to be done is subsumed presently in the Ministry of Works. So we could form many new agencies in government. If we do not reform what we have now, our people are going to be in trouble. So we support this bill, but we recognize the challenges we face are clear and present today. Just by way of example, Madam Speaker, the people of Eleuthera are facing a water crisis. And we are not even impacted by the likes of Dorian or Matthew. And yet, residents are unable to get proper production and distribution of water. It's not a new problem. It didn't just emerge over the last year. There was problems when we were in the chair, and there are problems now. Madam Speaker, what we need is a fundamental transformation in the way the Ministry of Works work and the way in which governments of the Bahamas engage with these private enterprises that are supposed to supplement the work that they provide on our behalf. That is what is required. And Madam Speaker, in the context of this is what we should be discussing. So we come to talk about disaster preparedness. The absence of water for residents on a consistent basis is a disaster. And so let me say, it is most unfortunate. No, in fact, we took them to court. That's what we did. So it wasn't a complaint, we went to court. And so, Madam Speaker, here we are today. Here we are. No, we took them to court. We didn't just complain. So, Madam Speaker, already the pain is coming on the other side. So, Madam Speaker, in Eleuthera, we have 2 members of parliament. And we have one of them who decides that he's sitting in cabinet, Madam Speaker, sitting in cabinet. Not far away from, just knowing the size of the room, we were there before, not far away from the member for Fort Charlotte. And obviously, I'm not attached as you are. And so, Madam Speaker, not far away from the member of Fort Charlotte, and they seem not to have talked in the past or unable to arrive at a common solution in the best interest of the people of Eleuthera. It is the most amazing thing for those of us that are familiar with or have sat in cabinet to see one cabinet minister, junior, by the way, call a senior man, call him to account, to come to a meeting so he could talk to him about what he has spoken to him about, fixing the situation in Eleuthera. I wonder if he talked to his member to the north to say, come, let us reason together. Let's figure out a way that we can work in unison to transform the condition of all of these people who we love. And by the way, I ran for them one time before too. And unfortunately, Madam Speaker, today we are facing a serious situation in Eleuthera that requires cooperation between ministers and members of their backbench to arrive at a common solution in the interest of the people we love and all of us have agreed to serve. Mr. Acting Prime Minister, the member for Exuma and Ragged Island, I commend to you that it is important that the Prime Minister speaks to this matter. It is that critical, and it rises to that level when you have 2 ministers in the same room on a completely different page on a common problem that is affecting, to borrow from a press release, the health and safety of the people of Eleuthera. So, Mr. Acting Prime Minister, you have a chance. You have a chance to redeem yourself from that hotel debacle in Grand Bahama by intervening in this situation, because I believe that the substantive Prime Minister is traveling at the moment. He's en route. I think it was in Angola. He's going to Angola, or he's on his way to Angola. And so, in his absence, the member for Exuma and Ragged Island, there is a need to intervene and have a discussion with your colleagues. Bring them together, hold their hands, and guide them in dealing with this situation. And by the way, while you're doing it, the people in San Salvador also have an issue that come around midnight. They tell me that Club Med gets the water, and then come early in the morning that they get the water back. So it's important. Wow. It's important to address that issue. And if there's clarification, you can do it right after I'm through. And again, we'd like to know, is it accurate that the pipes that were being laid in Ket Island, that the Ministry of Works has removed the requisite equipment, but it will have to be remobilized in order to deal with the issues in terms of the absence of potable water in all areas in Kent Island. So, Madam Speaker, as we talk about disaster preparedness and recovery, we need a functioning Ministry of Works. We are not certain that the minister is up to the task. If his performance there is going to be the equivalent of his performance at BPL. We remind the public that the Minister of Works, we have called for his resignation in large measure because he misled the House. He has yet to apologize to his colleagues in the House. I certainly did not hear he apologize to them in Cabinet. And we are asking that if he does not have the courage to stand up, to recant the statements that he made that were inaccurate, he should do the honorable thing and he should demit certainly the role that he presently has in Cabinet. Or the Prime Minister, the one in Africa or en route to Africa, or the one here from Exuma Ragged Island, that you ought to make the decision. Because BPL is an albatross at the moment. It is a burden. It is painful for the Bahamian people. And the 163% increase in fuel costs is at the doorstep. Sorry, no, it is in the bosom of the minister and those who assisted, aided, and abetted him. According to him, that was the Prime Minister. And so again, Madam Speaker, when we talk about disaster preparedness, reconstruction and recovery, water and sewage is a live issue for the Bahamian people. I'm advised by residents who are very close to Aqua Design, who understands what is going on there, that there were technicians who were missing from the plant for ages, for months, and that the Ministry of Works was fully aware. Technicians have just arrived, huh? That you had 2 wells, one of which needs a submersible pump, simple things, but couldn't get it. That's for over 10 months. Over 10 months, the Ministry of Works, the Ministry of Works was aware of the challenges being faced, but there was no sense of urgency in resolving the matter. So, Madam Speaker, it is important for us. You in the chair, fix it now. We are in opposition because the public made a determination that they wish to try other talented Bahamians. We now say to those other talented Bahamians that you need to act, and you need to act expeditiously. But when you fail to act, what you should not do is mislead the public about what you knew, when you knew it, and why you failed to act on their behalf. Just before I leave Ministry of Works, the road works is a major problem right now in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, but in New Providence in particular. Again, the Minister of Works has ahead of him, and we have as a country ahead of us, the need for seawalls. The need for seawalls in Grand Bahama, in Abaco, in Eleuthera, where we just visited, in need for repair to docks. We need a host of things that need to be transformed. If you are struggling with potholes in New Providence, what is the likelihood that you will have the capacity to deal with the bigger, far more expensive challenges that we face in the rest of the country? If you have an impasse and you are unable to collaborate as colleagues, an astute Prime Minister whose eyes is on the ball, whose hand is on the till, will either get colleagues to cooperate or he will relieve the cabinet of those that are an albatross around its neck. And so, Madam Speaker, let me move on. When we talk about disaster preparedness, mitigation, recovery, and reconstruction, Madam Speaker, we need the entire governmental system to be focused on cooperating. One of the things mentioned both by the mover of this bill as well as the seconder is the need for intersectoral committees where persons of seniority ought to sit on these committees so that when you go to a meeting talking about preparing the overall government system for preparedness, mitigation, recovery, and reconstruction, these are people who can make decisions. These are people who just come to take notes and go back. But they could make some decisions. Because what we need is for an overhaul of our system. We need, when we are putting in place new policies, when we are considering legislation in other ministries or programs, we are doing it against the backdrop of the fact that we live in a hurricane alley. What are the implications given where we live and what could possibly happen? Why am I saying that? Several reasons. Our financial planning, as is contemplated in this bill, should look at how we are going to fund these ambitious things that we have spoken about in this bill. Because we good, politicians are very good at coming to this place, and on both sides, we pass bills, then we don't have a means sometimes to fund it. And then we are extremely proud of the fact that we've taken this step. And yes, it's an important step in the right direction, but it's insufficient if your financial priorities are such that you are still handicapping the eventual implementation of what you pass. Let me give an example. One example of governments creating problems and then forcing some other people to pay for it is the same situation with pharmacies and grocery stores. Governments have misplaced priorities in how monies are spent on a whole range of things. But when we are facing a financial crisis, call it whatever you wish, including inflationary pressures, we then want other sectors who I believe should, one, obey the law, two, share part of our national burden. But the government, by force of law, put pressure on people who unfortunately are unable, except at the ballot box, to put pressure on them when they are squandering the people's money and opportunities. So the $100 million that the member for Cat Island, Rumpkins, and Salvador and the member for Fort Charlotte has cost the country to squander, that $100 million, would be very important in helping to put some of these things in place. So the grocers are asked to step up to the plate. Or there's a penalty, follow the law. But those persons who made ill-advised decisions and sought to cover it up, who holds them to account? Who holds them to account? So follow the law, yes, follow the law. But why doesn't the speaker of that thing also follow the law? Follow the law would mean you give an account for using the public money and spending it on a private political trip to Bermuda, breaking the law, but telling other people, follow the law. You all follow the law. See, because there's one law for me, and there's one law for the rest of y'all. Follow the law means that you comply with the Fiscal Responsibility Act, the Procurement Act, that you've given out hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of contracts, hundreds of millions of dollars. And you say, look here, we ain't on your run. We ain't on your run. We ain't telling you all nothing. You get the information when you get the information. By the way, we gonna amend that law. So here's a fella smoking a blunt and get locked up for smoking a blunt because he said, man, look here, the way the public mind is thinking, this blunt in a short while will not be illegal. So what's your problem? So you lock him up because you say, well, until that day, I can keep you for 48 hours and I'll carry you before the court and you'll have that on your record for quite some time. This government, however, refuses to comply with the procurement law and says, we're not going to comply with it because we're going to change it. So what about the other fellow who you just, the small fellow who you just arrested for the joint? And what is interesting about it, just by the way, since we're on the subject of the fellow with the joint, you remember we said in here to you all that while expunging COVID records, some of the silly things that were slapped on people, fine. Why don't we just expunge all the records for all those persons who got simple possession charges and sentencing? Why don't we remove that of their police record? And in here, what was said, oh no, we can get that done. Don't worry about that. We can get it done by year end. And then I spoke to a few of the members here. So for everybody out there who was hoping for that expungement, I spoke to some colleagues in here, and the colleagues in here agreed that it made sense.
The chair recognizes the honorable member for Exuma and Ragged Island.
Madam Speaker, the former leader of the now opposition presented the idea of expunging records maybe half-term in his short 4.5-year term when the member for Marco City sat in his cabinet. Now he represents Madam Speaker, that it ought to be done expeditiously, when in fact he had an opportunity to do it, and therefore the misleading of this House is the height of hypocrisy, Madam Speaker. So he had an opportunity to do it. Now he comes and talks about woulda, coulda, shoulda, and what we should do, when he sat there as a cabinet minister and said nothing. They did nothing.
Thank you, Honorable Member. Marco City, you may proceed.
Madam Speaker, I always try to be generous to the member for Exuma and Ragged Island. I know it's important for him to discharge these new responsibilities he have while the Prime Minister is traveling, so I give that to him. But thank you for the intervention. But let me say, as I was saying earlier, Madam Speaker, this administration had an opportunity in this House, upon our recommendation, multiple members, to expunge the records for persons who were charged with simple possession, and they agreed. Of course, one of the challenges, again, this disconnect in the cabinet as it is configured, is you have an activist attorney general. And so the activist attorney general obviously has convinced his colleagues, oh no, we'll get that done, and we'll get it done by year's end. And he's pushed many pieces of legislation that I know have created great angst and discomfort for some members on the government side. And then he now says, we won't get to it by end of year. At a minimum, if no other component, even if you're not bringing the industrial hemp, even if you're not discussing the medicinal, what about the restorative justice component of it? Expunging the records. But I digress. Madam Speaker, I was making the point that resources are required to implement some of the provisions of this bill, and this government has a problem with financial priorities. That's why public servants are outside, Madam Speaker, because they're saying you could do for all of these other categories of workers, what about us? In fact, you've made tentative commitments to us. We want to know, why are we missing in the mix? They believe, Madam Speaker, that this administration, who came to power on the backs of labor, claiming to be full partners and committed to labor, are now engaged in union busting. That they are, in fact, putting in place provisions.
The chair recognizes the honorable member for Exuma and Ragged Island.
Of the opposition as being most disingenuous and misleading, Madam Speaker. If he wishes to have a briefing on the matter, he can speak with the minister responsible for public service or labor and get that briefing. To come here and allege that this government is union busting is not only misleading, but he knows that it is, Madam Speaker. Anything can be said outside, Madam Speaker, but this is an honorable place. And unless this member can validate what he is saying, he ought to withdraw it, or it ought to be expunged from the records. It's most reckless, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, honorable member.
Madam Speaker, what I find so ironic about the member's contribution just now, not a possible chance I can withdraw the statement, right? So let me help you out. You separately met with the union leadership. And the union leadership, this is what the union leadership and members are saying. Let me give it to you this way. The point that was made, it's not going to be expunged. I will put it back on the record immediately when I get out. It will, no.
The chair recognizes the honorable member for Exuma and Ragged Island.
The member for Marco City alleged that this government is union busting. Unless he is prepared, Madam Speaker, to validate it, it ought to be withdrawn, or I ask you, Madam Speaker, that it be expunged.
Thank you, honorable member. Honorable member.
Madam Speaker, there is nothing unparliamentary about what I said to this gentleman. Yeah, except, well, then go and tell them that. Go outside, you be a man, don't run from the crowd and talk to them on the sidewalk. Go in front of them and tell them that. Go and tell them that. Man up and go and tell them that.
Address the chair. Yes, address the chair.
Go ahead, go
The
ahead.
chair recognizes the honorable member for Exuma and Ragged Island.
Speaker, I repeat the previous request. The member is misleading this House, and he knows it. And I ask you, please, to have him withdraw the remarks or have it expunged from the record.
Thank you, honorable member. Honorable member, are you willing to withdraw?
Not at all, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, Madam Speaker, let me help the House out a little bit in this regard. One of the requirements in negotiations with unions is that at the end of the day, the government presents its side or the union presents its side and they go back and forth. They arrive at a final conclusion. Union members and union leaders are of the view that the government has proceeded in executing through their finance officers payments as if they are carrying out what has been agreed to the union, even though what the union has asked for is different. And they said, Madam, would you permit me to complete my statement? So Madam Speaker, in the event that a government behaves in that manner, and they go ahead and they are seeking to pay independent of what that discussion has been, the union leadership believes that what the government is essentially doing is trying to erode the authority of the union leadership that is in negotiation with them, that negotiated a different figure other than what they are now seeking to provide to its membership. They are only asking for proper negotiation. This administration, rather than trying to silence me, should go and meet with the union. They should go and meet with the union again.
The chair recognizes the honorable member for Exuma and Ragged Island.
The member is seeking to gain cheap political points, Madam Speaker. I remain focused on the point that I made, that the member suggested that this government is union busting. He has not validated it. He attempted to change what he is saying, Madam Speaker. He's attempted to change what he's saying. Madam Speaker, let me clarify for the record, Madam Speaker. If the government is giving to workers what they've asked for, I fail to see how that would be union busting. That's the first point, Madam Speaker. Secondly, Madam Speaker, I'm standing on a point of order. Come on, relax yourself. Relax yourself. I'm on the floor. If the government is giving to the workers what the workers are asking for, I fail to see how that is union busting, Madam Speaker.
I agree.
Whilst the member changed his language by now quoting Hesse in the second iteration of what he said, I maintain that he has misled. He has misled because he indicated that in his view, the government is union busting. He is wrong, he is misleading, and he ought to withdraw it.
Honorable members, I will strike that from the record after listening to that.
You don't know. Union busting is when you prevent employees.
Honorable members.
Yes,
honorable
you
member,
have raised union busting. I'm seeking to understand
members,
what is
there will
legal
not be
busting.
two members on their feet.
I am trying to, you've used union busting. You have used, no, you don't, but you have to. You have to, because union busting taken out of its context. No, but you are quoting it. You are accepting it. You are repeating it. So therefore you accept it. You are accepting it. You are, sorry. You are accepting it. You are accepting it.
There's one member on the floor.
Speaker, the member for Marco City, by utilizing the words of others, is accepting. Union members or whoever you are, he then accepts that is correct. That's how it works in the parliamentary rules. So therefore, I'm asking, what is union busting? Because union busting, as I understand, is when you try and you prevent employees from becoming unionized. That is union busting. So therefore, union busting can't happen because they are unionized. So I don't understand what he means. So please explain. And just using the words to cause for interpretation, Madam Speaker, negative interpretation, that is the effort by the member of Marco City. That is not union busting at all, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, honourable member. Marcos,
The union is listening. I simply, what I said at the beginning of my presentation, we are here to reflect and facilitate the dreams and aspirations of our people. So if they then say, this is what our concern is, we are here because we have some challenges meeting with folks. And by the way, the member for West End and Bimini, you have been identified as one of those persons. 9 months in advance, make certain commitments or representation, and cannot find your way back to them. So they are here because they feel they do not have access to you all to have a discussion on matters that affect
Members, there will not be four members on the floor. There will not be four members on the floor. If we cannot follow the rules, I will suspend this place. And some people will be removed if they cannot. The chair recognizes the honourable member for Exuma and Ragged Island.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I made a public statement to this regard this morning. I will now correct what the member is saying. Madam Speaker, the unions are aware that the matters before the government and them are agreed, and the government had been inviting the BPSU to sign the agreement. The agreement, subject to being cleaned up, is scheduled to be signed when there is an agreed date between the Minister of State or the substantive minister who's currently traveling. I communicated that publicly on the record with the union members this morning, and I put it now on the record of this House. Yes. Anything contrary put on the record by the member opposite is false. And these are the facts surrounding the matter, Madam Speaker. And whilst the members seek to gain cheap political points, the responsible, honorable member of this House has an obligation to the truth. And that is the truth, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, honourable member. The chair recognizes the honourable member for St. Barnabas.
Madam Speaker, this conversation about union busting, right? Conversation about union busting. I have a right to stand, man. The Tribune, Madam Speaker, the Tribune, December 1st, 2022. Stop union busting. Union leaders yesterday called on the Davis administration to stop its union busting tactics, calling the government's recent announcement about the forthcoming salary increases for public servants that were reportedly made without consultation a blatant disregard for unions. Stop union busting.
Honourable member, are you adopting that?
Yes.
If you all have a question, check on you. Oh, Wikipedia, something.
Honourable members, that has been stricken.
We got to this point because we were saying this administration is famous for telling people to follow the law when they are not committed to following the law. Same administration that's busy in looking in every nook and cranny to investigate every single soul that passed this way. Let me pause for a moment. This is the same administration that talked about the value of NGOs that they came in this House and savaged around the food program. Savage those persons who were participating in the food program. The same NGOs who assisted in disaster recovery and reconstruction without laying the evidence, because the report did not even reflect some of the assertions that were said. So this whole business about transparency and wanting to work with non-governmental agencies, we don't buy it. So Madam Speaker, The same government that calls for others to follow the law failed to follow the law when they took money from the public treasury to pay to go to Bermuda and failed to give an account. It's the same government that promised an investigation for one of its members who was allegedly struck a police officer with a vehicle, and to date they have not returned with any information on it. It's the same government who's telling us to follow the law, who's violating the Fiscal Responsibility Act, the Procurement Act, and numerous other financial pieces of legislation. It's the same group who lack the moral authority, who are busy with new prosecutions when they are old prosecutions they're trying to find ways of nullying. By all means, come. And so this is the same group with the member for West End and Bimini, who's a member of Parliament in Grand Bahama, and stood idly by in the cabinet of the Bahamas while the Sayers order came to an end, and people are still struggling to find money in order to recover, to import those items critical to their welfare as both residents and businesses. And so it's the same person.
The chair recognizes the honourable member.
I thought you went on a walk.
Again, Madam Speaker, the member is seeking once more to earn cheap political points in misleading this House. Yes, the Sirs order ended. However, it has been made very clear that persons who are in need, who suffered as a result of Dorian, can still make application and get assistance. What the statement said very clearly is that the government, Madam Speaker, sought to plug financial loopholes. The member for East Grand Bahama, who has been the Minister of Finance before, had been involved in the ending of a Sirs order, I believe in 2018, 2019 or 2020. He knows what I'm talking about. He knows the facts. But yet they would stand and seek to mislead. I say for the record, any resident citizen of the Bahamas in Grand Bahama or in Abaco who have been disadvantaged in relation to their property, and I'm sure the member for Central will speak to this, can still make application to the Ministry for Grand Bahama. They can still make application to the Office of the Prime Minister in Abaco and will still get relief. We will not provide relief for foreigners who are building second homes. We'll not provide relief for persons, for example, who would have had insurance and not in need of such relief. We will ensure that government revenues are collected so that persons who are in need can be supported, so that we can build schools and roads and seawalls, Madam Speaker. But the persons needing help will get help.
Thank you, honourable member.
Let me go very quickly, Madam Speaker, because I heard Abaco and all hitting the desk, and we are actually fighting for them because they are not fighting for them. Madam Speaker, hollow words. This is the same spokesperson who assured this House with great ovation and beating the table that that hotel is a done deal. Madam Speaker, hollow words, Madam Speaker, hollow words.
Chair recognizes the honourable member for Exome Right Island.
Every time he mislead, I'll speak. Thank you. Am I recognized, Madam Speaker? I was recognized. Madam Speaker, I thought I was recognized.
Assembly against another member of this House. Those are dishonorable words. Those are insinuation. And I ask that you guys It's a creative use some other language besides cheap political points.
This is not out on the streets, Madam Speaker. This is a place where the public is looking at us, and whether he believes it or not, the points being made by our leader are very valid points.
Speaker, the actor who was previously, I withdraw that, Madam Speaker. The member for Marco City who was previously speaking seemed to be jumping from pillar to post to earn some, again, cheap political points, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the member has now gone on to say that this member said that the hotel was a done deal. It never happened. He's misleading again, Madam Speaker. What we said, that there was a deal under contract subject to due diligence and agreeing a heads of agreement. He knows this, but yet he stands now seemingly fighting against the island where he has a seat that he represents, Madam Speaker. He's too gleeful about it. I'm very confused about this, Madam Speaker. Again, he's misleading, Madam Speaker, and I ask that he withdraw and discontinue, Madam Speaker.
Madam Speaker, hollow words from someone who has excited the public and have caused an anticlimactic result, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, let me conclude. Let me conclude with this, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the members from Abaco and certainly the member for West End and Bimini should have a conversation. You should have a conversation in cabinet with your colleagues about the challenges people still face. For a whole year, tell us how many houses you've built despite all of your criticism. Tell us how many houses you built in Grand Bahama in response to Dorian. In response to Dorian, how many houses did you build in Grand Bahama since Dorian? Secondly, this administration has talked a lot about why they are spending a ton of money traveling around the world. A ton of money. Madam Speaker, what is interesting, Madam Speaker, is that we have made the case to the country that the Prime Minister is traveling the world, and in so doing, he has created tremendous cachet. In other words, he's in high demand, people are listening to him, and that in fact, the statement has been made in the House by multiple ministers that the Prime Minister's voice is pivotal so that when the country needs it to speak on its behalf at the most critical moment, he will be available. Isn't it interesting, with the collapse of FTX, we had an opportunity to put on display that powerful, influential voice. The Prime Minister didn't speak. The Deputy Leader didn't speak. Michael Alcides didn't
Honorable member.
speak. Madam Speaker, may I complete the statement that I'm making? Madam Speaker, may I complete this? May I complete this statement? The statement I'm concluding now. So, Madam Speaker.
About FTX?
No, this is not about FTX. This is not just about FTX. I'm saying the powerful voice of the Prime Minister was silent, so was the Deputy silent, so was Michael Alcides silent. Instead, you went for the Attorney General. The same group that played the race card, that talked about Black managed countries matter. When it was time to speak to the whole world, the Prime Minister didn't speak. The Deputy Prime Minister didn't speak. Michael Alcides didn't speak. So the question is, where is the influential voice that you have been touting? Where is the
member?
The member have exhausted his time, Madam Speaker. You've given him some leverage, but the member have exhausted his time.
Members with
Brilliant.
What? Disaster?
the chair recognizes the honorable member for South.
Just wanted to clarify something for the Bahamian people. While the member for Marco City spoke, he mentioned that, or insinuated that there may have been some water challenges in San Salvador. And I wanted to clarify for the Bahamian people that that is not true. In fact, since we have brought on Club Med, the desalination plant has improved its production from 90,000 imperial gallons a day to 120 imperial gallons per day. So as a result, in fact, we've increased water production, and it has gotten better, not gotten worse. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Honorable Member. The chair recognizes the Honorable Member for Engliston.
The member for Marco City, in his very animated delivery, he mischaracterized the Prime Minister's presentation in the United Nations about the plight of nations that face continuing inequitable conditions that are historic and that are perpetuated and that are chronic and very evident in the everyday lives of many states. His point was not about race. His point was about the issue of, you said that. No, you don't need to respond because you don't have your response. His comments were to highlight and to advocate for states such as ours, which pay a high price for the actions of third states and are not appropriately represented and protected and have a voice. And that is what he sought to do. It was no race card being played.
And Grand Bahama gets hit more than anybody
I
else.
had another member on their feet first. The chair recognizes the Honorable Member for Yamacraw.
Madam Speaker, I just rise to clarify what has been purported by the good member on the floor about what he heard on the outside and this false notion of union busting. Coming from a former cabinet minister who had failed to sign many union agreements, who upon coming to office, we would have signed at least 5 in recent months. The member for Golden Gates and the Minister of State for Public Service has put out a statement saying the following: we were very happy to receive PPSU missive indicating their readiness to sign. As such, the Labor Relations Unit of the Ministry of Public Service immediately started final cleanup of the agreement, which was then forwarded to Finance for final vetting. Once complete, we will be ready to sign as soon as possible. We have been waiting to get this behind us in the best interest of our employees. I would be extremely happy to finally sign off on the BPSU agreement, which is a great way to end the year. I would also like to read for the record, Madam Speaker, December 5th, 2022, a document addressed to the Honorable Fred Mitchell concerning signing of the industrial agreement. And it says, "Dear Minister, this missive finds you well. The Bahamas Public Service Union right to request a final draft of the proposal of the government of the Bahamas for consideration. The Public Service Union is available for signing any day from the 5th of December, 2022. We await your response. Thanking you in advance." This is from the President of the Public Service Union. So to suggest, Madam Speaker, there's a communication saying that the government was waiting and ready to sign with all the formalities. The Public Service just wrote that they are ready to sign as of today. So I think that the member and his refusal to withdraw should be a bit, it should be more exciting to now withdraw that comment earlier, but I understand I struck it from the record. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Honorable Member. The chair recognizes the Honorable Member for Marco City.
Point only to say the member for St. Barnabas has already read the union words into the record that speaks directly opposite to what you said, so I'll leave that. But with respect, Madam Speaker, to the member for Angliston, I want it on the record, Madam Speaker, with respect to the point made by the member for Angliston. I have had no misconception about the point the member for Cat Island, Rumpkins, and Salvador made at the United Nations. I have said on more than one occasion in this place that we support statements that have been made. When we didn't support, we've gone on the record to say we didn't. The point I made in this House is that this team, this New Day government, has said to the country that the frequent travels of the Prime Minister that we have had concerns with, let me finish the point. What happened? You're afraid to get clarity? Is that it? Well, let me complete the statement. That you have sought to use the frequent travels of the Prime Minister in order to make the case that he has grown in stature on the international stage. Yes, you have. Over and over, you've said it. And so I'm making the point. You are saying black managed countries matter. And we are agreeing with you. But we are asking the question, as the Minister of Finance, under which new investments such as FTX come, as the deputy in charge of investments, as Michael Alcides involved in financial services, how is it that the three of you with big voices have refused to speak to the international community? Why have you refused to speak to the international community? Why have you refused to speak to the international community? Why? What is the reason? What image did you want to project? What image did you want to project?
Honourable member. Honourable member. The chair recognizes the honourable member for examining right.
I don't wish to belabor this tiara, Madam Speaker, but the member accused this side of playing the race card, Madam Speaker, and then he stands and pretends like he didn't say it, Madam Speaker. The member for Angliston refuted it, and therefore he should be honorable, and he should withdraw it, Madam Speaker. Just strike it.
Honourable member. Yes, Madam Speaker. You're on your feet. I haven't even identified you. Yes, Madam. I want to move on with this debate. Okay? We are all over the place talking about FTX and all these other things, and we are talking about disaster risk management today. And I asked the members, to stay focused. Member, what happened with you today?
I'm feeling well.
Okay. As many, the chair recognizes the honourable members of Central and South Africa.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Again, I am humbly honored to rise on behalf of the constituents of Central and South Africa, who I serve and represent. This morning, we've heard a lot of things going on, and one struck me, so I'd like to speak to my fellow Albaconians before we get into the crux of the bill. SIRS, the Umbrella SIRS Act. I remember the Umbrella SIRS Act being extended for months at a time and not knowing when it was going to stop or start or so on and so forth. And in that time, there was much a grievance of taking advantage of that particular act. I saw investment houses. They once were second homes. Now we have investment houses spread throughout the Alba Coast, building second and third homes, building their house twice as big. I've seen Bahamians take materials from Grand Bahama and Abaco and send them down all through the rest of the Keys. It's not what this act was made to be. That's right. It's not what the definitive nature of that act was supposed to be. It was to help and assist the rebuild from the biggest natural disaster in modern history, Dorian. The case by case that is now, so the umbrella has expired the 1st of December, but from then we are doing a case by case. So any Abaconian or Grand Bahamian that needs to rebuild a house or a business can put their application in and it will be approved. This is for.
Point of order, Madam Speaker.
The chair recognizes the honorable member.
When we last checked, Madam Speaker, first of all, in Grand Bahama, as members of parliament, we consistently got complaints that people did not know what that process was. That's one. Two, when those who knew what the process was checked for the forms were not available. Are the forms available? No, are the forms available? We did, and the forms were not yet printed. The forms were not yet printed.
Madam Speaker, the chair recognizes the honorable member for East Grand Bahama.
Madam Speaker, and this is a matter that I think most, if not all, Grand Bahamians and Abaconians are very, very interested in. The question was raised about going to the Ministry of Grand Bahama. I went to Ministry of Grand Bahama yesterday, about 11 o'clock. I went there after I went to ZNS to do my Christmas message. And if anyone knows the office, you have to pass the Ministry of Grand Bahama office before you make your way up the stairs. I went in there. I asked, are there any forms? The answer was no, the Ministry of Finance has not approved any forms. That was the answer that was provided to me. What also was said was if you have an already stamped form, bring that already stamped form and send a letter in. It does not provide for those people, as the member for Central and South Abaco is saying, and the member for Exuma is saying, that anyone who still requires assistance can come, because those forms are not there. They are not there.
The chair recognizes the honorable member for Exuma.
Madam Speaker, I want to thank the members for the applause, Madam Speaker. If the members are concerned about a process or a form, Madam Speaker, there's a responsible way to do this, Madam Speaker. 1 hour before arriving here today, I spoke with the Minister for Economic Affairs, the Honorable Michael Alkides, who has confirmed what I've said earlier, and who's confirming what the member for Central and South Abaco is saying. So rather than coming here grandstanding, Madam Speaker, the members who represent constituencies in Grand Bahama ought to really just be clear that the citizens of the country can go into the Ministry for Grand Bahama, can go into the ministry for the office of the Prime Minister, and access assistance. I have been reliably informed by the minister responsible, Michael Alkides, minister responsible for economic affairs, that this matter is in hand, Madam Speaker. So I say no more on it, and it's not worthy of belaboring the point.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Again, and I say this in all seriousness, that this is a serious matter that many residents are very concerned about. There are no forms, there is no criteria, there is no parameters as to what could be asked for. For example, can cars be asked for? Is building materials there? Can we ask for any assistance for duty-free? Can land also be done as was done under the previous SIR's order? There is no parameters. There's no system that is in place. That's what we are trying to say to you.
Call someone.
I attended there myself and sought to see what assistance could be provided. And what was said was, there are no forms available for what you are asking for.
Go print the forms.
Honorable members, the chair recognizes the honorable member for Freetown, but before you begin, you will find out the details
You-
of
you
what
don't
we are
want to talk
discussing,
about
and we
crime.
report back
Not
after
you.
lunch as to what the case-by-case findings are. What the chair recognizes the honorable member for Freetown.
Madam Speaker, we take very seriously assisting our constituents. The member for East Grand Bahama says that the information that was provided to him, if one accepts everything he says, is if you have a stamped approved form, write a letter and you'll be accommodated. And that means, therefore, that if you had a form, you can get what you got on that form. So to say there's no parameters of what it covers cannot be correct, because if you are told to bring your stamp form and a letter, clearly you will be accommodated by what's on your stamp form.
If you recognize the honorable member for West Bahama, yes, honorable members, I will get to you. Allow the member.
We all represent constituents in Grand Bahama, and Madam Speaker, in the interest of us all, we will find it on the lunch break, the position, and report after the lunch break, just to make sure we all understand. Just to make sure. Just to make sure. We want to make sure that we all are aware, so we won't be guessing. We'll just make sure the public is aware after the lunch break.
There is a already stamped form, but the point is that is not what Exuma is saying, and that is not what Central and South Abaco is saying. What they are saying is anyone, whether you have a stamped form or not, anyone who requires assistance from Dorian can come and apply. And I am saying that that is not the case. They are requiring,
You're the finance minister.
I am saying what residents are being told. What residents are being, what residents are being told
Honorable members,
is
let's
that
get back to the debate.
what residents are being told
Let's
is that
get
you
back to
must
the debate.
have this stamped form. And what we need clarity on is what Exuma is saying true? Is what Central and South Abaco is saying true? That anyone who requires assistance can get assistance.
Allow me.
Thank you.
We have the member in this place, the honorable member for Pinewood, who has direct responsibility for disaster release, disaster risk management. He will report back to this place after lunch on the clarification of what we are debating here. The minute I will allow the minister to speak, the chair recognizes the honorable member for Pinewood.
Madam Speaker, this is an important issue, and I will report back. But what I could say from what I know now is that Dorian has happened 3 years ago. There are individuals who, before the decision was made, with the SIRS orders, who would have had their stamped forms in. A decision was made. Those individuals can still access help. But as was said in here today, 3 years after Dorian, is it reasonable for individuals to just find out that they would have forms, that they would have had this situation? Please, I didn't interrupt any of you. Even if they didn't have money, Madam Speaker, the forms or the applications for assistance should not take 3 years. We heard of second homes and third homes that were building. Those individuals who had their forms submitted that are already stamped, they will be considered. Those who came afterwards, after the SIRS orders have been discontinued, will be done on a case-by-case basis. There may be a case where they can reasonably explain the reason and they'll be given assistance. But should we go and print out 10,000 forms for individuals when, in our view, that the man may not be there. That do not stop people from applying for some form. They're complaining more about form than the substance of the matter.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Central and South Abaco, you may continue.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So, my fellow Abaconians, SIRS is on a case-by-case basis, and you can go to the office of the Prime Minister in Abaco and apply for such. This Davis Cooper administration is focused on helping every Bahamian, particularly those that were distraught by Dorian, that lost everything, and it may have taken up to 3 years to get on their feet enough to rebuild their house or rebuild their business. So I encourage you, if you are one of those, if you are in Abaco or Grand Bahama and you are still rebuilding, go and fill out your form and your case will be heard. Yeah. So I'd like to bring something a little bit more light to the this great house. Christmas is coming. Christmas is soon upon us. It's a time of spending with your family, of time of
acting like the Grinch taking away the SIRS orders.
the Grinch took away a lot of things in the past 4.5 years, but we won't speak about that. So So my fellow Abaconians, I would like to
I don't know who's supervising you, but you're getting tough.
So my fellow Abaconians, I would like to say that Christmas is near, and we are going to have a grand time in Abaco as we are rebuilding and we are coming back to normalization of life. We'll make sure the youth and the children have those special experiences that we had when we were growing up. So on the 15th of December, Moores Island will have their Christmas Bazaar. It will be filled with gifts for the kids, food, games, and entertainment. On the 17th of December, Saturday, Central Abaco will have their Christmas Bazaar in the BAIC Park. Santa will be there distributing gifts, food will be available, entertainment, games, and fun for all the youths. Those in South Abaco, there will be transport provided. So I encourage everyone to come out, get some Christmas cheer, have some good food, let the kids come play, and enjoy what it is to be a part of the holiday times and Christmas. Now, there's a lot that other things that were brought up this morning, but I am one to debate the actual bill and not debate things over and over again like I'm a marketing major and trying to convince the public of some other thing. So
That sounds good.
This National Disaster Risk Management Bill is something I have some deep personal experience and connection with, and I am happy to contribute and support. Abaco is hit by a major hurricane on average every 3.5 years. Mr. Deputy Speaker, Abaco is hit by a major hurricane almost every 3.5 years on average. A major hurricane is categorized by 3 or higher. My personal experience throughout the Hurricane Dorian disaster is one of the reasons I stand here today in this great house. My experience taught me leadership, management, survival, and gave me clarity and I intend to speak loud and clear for my Abaconians. Deputy Speaker, at a very young age, I became one of the first young volunteer cadets at our Hopetown Volunteer Fire and Rescue in Hopetown. Through the years, we continued to educate on fire safety, medical safety, and first response, effective firefighting techniques, and so on and so forth. And periodically, we hold classes to update these skills and learn new skills as methods and techniques evolve. We do this so we can be prepared, so we can be ready for whatever emergency hits our shores, from boat sinking to fires to medical traumas to hurricanes to natural disasters. We prepare so that we can save lives. By saving time, we save lives. By being organized, we save lives. Deputy Speaker, I use this group of volunteer rescuers as an example. There are many groups such like this in the islands of the Bahamas. And as an island community, we have unfortunately gone through several natural disasters together. But from each disaster, we recognize we have learned a lot from each unique situation. We learn from each mistake, or learn from what we can do better when the next disaster strikes. In 1999, there was Hurricane Floyd that hit Abaco. We thought that that was the worst of the worst, but we learned how to come together, how to prepare, and how to react after the storm has passed. When Dorian threatened our island, which was eventually became a direct impact, we immediately began preparations. We don't take the storms lightly on the islands. We know preparation is key. Planning is key. Disaster risk management is key. We made a running list of every single soul on the island and where they plan to stay for the storm. This list is vital as it is valued the estimate of how many persons remained and where, and any health concerns, where the elderly were, and where the vulnerable members were seeking shelter. We stayed in communication throughout the storm, and we knew where to send help when conditions calmed during the eye and who needed to seek alternative shelter. Immediately after the storm passes, we set up command centers. We were going down the list to account for every single person and their health status. Whenever possible, we try to note elderly's health conditions, those with diabetes that need medication. We prioritize and evacuated higher risk residents first, with limited use of satellite phones, and speak to persons outside of Abaco, and to reach out to our friends that would eventually come to our aid. We stayed in communication throughout when we could throughout the storm and the aftermath, where we knew we could send help, and when the conditions calmed during the eye. Oh, pardon me. I was rereading the same thing. This planning process helped us tremendously in the aftermath in getting those members of our community, the most vulnerable to those who were injured, and the help they needed immediately. This saves lives. Deputy Speaker, this bill intends to expand. This bill tends to expand upon this example of what our volunteer fire and rescue does. It is a national plan. It is a comprehensive plan, and when there is a plan, it saves lives. Lives of our dear Bahamians are the most important thing in this country. There are many groups that have taken up the mantle, and many governmental organizations that have done in the past, NEMA and DRA and so on and so forth. These are a combination now within this disaster risk management bill to more fluidly, more natively, and more comprehensively plan and mitigate the disaster, the effects of natural disasters. With proper plan in place, we know where we can improve in each community, as each community is slightly different. A piece of this legislation speaks out to the administrators and the public committees and the integration of many other sectors and arms that make up what we are as the Bahamas. Deputy Speaker, this bill will promote the involvement and participation of all relevant sectors and stakeholders of all levels of society. The government working together with local councils, schools, clinics, churches, volunteer departments, NGOs, and public and private sector can collectively work together to evaluate their local risks, learn from past disasters, and formulate a plan by highlighting risk areas such as flood areas, low-lying areas, dune erosions, and so on and so forth. Plans should consult local members of every community, as each community is different. Each community's risk is slightly different, and have the experience of past disasters affect and evolve what we do for future disasters. This policy establishes a disaster risk management authority, and the administrator shall appoint a disaster risk management consultative committee responsible for advising the administrator on disaster risks for their corresponding areas, including local knowledge, especially in the Family Islands, is very important. Each Family Island's local knowledge is tenfold in weight to someone that may not know the particulars of that community. Every community in Key has unique challenges and risks that often only local representatives and residents would be knowledgeable on. Involving each community in formulating of a disaster plan is what will make these plans specialized and efficient, which in return saves lives. Deputy Speaker, as I has mentioned before, my experience with the Hopetown Volunteer Fire Rescue, there are groups like that throughout the Bahamas in every community, would have vital feedback and information for risk management and disaster plans. The private community would have vital information to go into the risk management and disaster plans. This bill promotes involvement and participation of all relevant sectors and stakeholders at all levels. I believe it is the only way to make a proper disaster management plan. This bill fosters the early warning system. The early warning system will enable individual communities, government departments, businesses, and others to take timely action to reduce disaster risks. Keeping the people in those possible impacted communities informed is vital. Communication is vital. That saves lives. This gives people time to evacuate if they wish, which was pointed out by the good member from Pinewood. There will be no more jail or fines for not evacuating your community. You will not be having a first responders access as you would if you were to follow the guidelines by the disaster relief. But this is particularly important to me as well. In the onsets of Hurricane Dorian, it was said that the Keys, Hopetown, Manawar, and Guanakee, were to evacuate to Marsh Harbor, to the community shelter in Marsh Harbor. If we were to have done that, many more lives would have been lost. The residents of the particular communities know their islands best and know if they should evacuate, know the consequences for not evacuating, and know that evacuating to a building that was swept away by Dorian was the wrong decision. Taking information and initiatives from all the communities and all the members creates a proper disaster management plan. Deputy Speaker, this bill also includes national humanitarian assistance standards. We must always be prepared for after the storm. Yes, an early warning system is good. Yes, preparation is key, but preparation does not stop when the storm hits. Preparation is for after the storm. As I can say from experience that often the aftermath can be much worse than the storm itself. Imagine being left without a roof over your head, with only the clothes on your back, no shoes, all your belongings scattered throughout the roads, the bush, or in the sea. On top of that all, you become afraid with the realization that all the water and food you tentatively secured in preparation is all gone, and you are unsure where you and your loved ones will get basic food and water again. This should never be the case in the Bahamas ever again. Our Bahamians should never have to worry again if or when our government will be coming to our aid. During the worst moments in their lives, as so many Abaconians and Grand Bahamians experience, they shouldn't have had the added worry and impact of the disaster in the aftermath. They should know their government is ready and help is on the way. Yes. That is one of the prime points in this bill. Is not only being prepared for before the storm and during the storm, but after the storm. Ensure the Bahamians have water, have food, and can survive in the aftermath of devastation. I know this personally. My family and I lost everything we owned in this world, and had to seek alternative shelter during the eye. If it weren't for the generosity of others in our community, my family and I would have nothing, including food, no water, no shelter for my young children. But I was not alone on this journey. So many Dorian survivors experienced the same, and it would be many, many days before any help would arrive. And the first help to arrive was from our friends. This brings back memories, so I'd like to special thanks to Spanish Wells for coming through the treacherous waters and the unknown obstacles to be one of the first to touch our island. So this bill will ensure plans are in place so preparations for aid and rescue are in place before the storm makes landfall. Once the weather clears and it is all safe to enter, a rush of aid and rescue missions are underway. That is leadership, Deputy Speaker. That is preparation. That is having a plan. And having a plan saves lives and mitigate the aftermath effects. To eliminate the red tape or confusion at the borders for those who wanted to send us immediate aid and relief, opposed to shutting down ports and airports, this gets the people help faster. And NGOs and individuals are more readily available to help if there aren't hurdles to jump through in order to help. We have many friends overseas that have jumped to our help in the past. We need to ensure that the process is made clear and easier so help can reach us and reach those who need it most in a timely manner. Huh? I have 2 minutes? Oh my goodness. All right.
The number only started 20 minutes of 1 o'clock. Yes. So like you can't possibly have only 2 minutes. I think we've had some issues and we've had the clock stopped on occasions. And I take records. I'm gonna start at 20 minutes to 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock.
I trust the clerk's records.
I didn't ask you what you trust, buddy. I'm talking to
Members,
nobody asking you
honorable members.
anything. Nobody asking you anything. I'm not asking the member for finance anything. We're just simply having a gentleman's discussion where men can get along and understand things. I'm suggesting that the member is entitled to at least 10 more minutes, Mr. Deputy.
1 minute.
Deputy Speaker,
agree on
if
the 10
I only
minutes.
have a minute left, may I please
10
ask for 8 more minutes to put on the clock?
Okay,
Yes, sir.
thank you.
Thank you. Plans in place to make sure the right people and the right NGOs come in and help and not take advantage of the situation nor make a profit. Having a comprehensive plan, a disaster risk management, this disaster risk management bill will help us prepare for before, during, and after. To provide national humanitarian assistance standards like water, sanitation, hygiene, food security, shelter, health needs is essential to every disaster aftermath. To have plans in place immediately to react is vital. To react immediately and not days later, but as soon as the weather permits and time, because time is of the essence. When Bahamians have just survived a natural disaster, they know that their government is there. I speak of Hurricane Dorian or Hurricane Floyd because you speak of what you know. And those are disasters myself, my family, my constituencies never wish to experience again. However, we must learn from it, otherwise lives were lost in vain. We must grow, we must and continue to improve our plans. Plans will be updated as needed because, like the example I spoke of in regards to the volunteer fire and rescue, you must update your skills and knowledge. You must educate when needed and improve upon. And I bring that volunteer fire and rescue up particularly because it's something that I know and something that I can speak of from firsthand experience. If it was not for them, there would be much more hardship after the storm. The previous government was lacking in them coming in an expedited manner to help and assist. I remember I remember the good member from Killarney coming down in the biggest chopper, the biggest helicopter I've ever seen in my life, and walking off without even a single bottle, let alone a case of water. There was no plan. There was multiple agencies trying to do the same thing. This bill will include those and make it a fluid process to help our fellow Abaconians. Deputy Speaker, I'll skip through some of my stuff because I have a lot to say on this matter, but I would like to say, in particularly, that having this plan in place and the aspects of it that are inclusive of all sectors, public, private, NGOs, different departments, having the administrator there with his own or her own consultative team from the different communities will make great steps forward in mitigating the onset of true tragedy that was at hand after Dorian. A disaster emergency fund is also essential. We cannot always rely that our friends will be there from abroad in a moment's notice. We have to have some preparation on our own to help our own Bahamians when things of this nature arise. We need a plan to make sure that we're not scrounging for food or water, to make sure that our friends from abroad do have the ability to come through and help us. But in all, this is a bill that I fully support personally. Central and South Abaco supports, and it's something that is life-changing. This bill will save lives. So in all, Central and South Abaco supports the Disaster Risk Management Bill 2022 and look forward to working together with the community in formulating a proper plan and preparedness for future disasters. God bless my fellow Abaconians, and God bless the Commonwealth of the Bahamas.
Thank you, Honorable Member. The Chair recognizes the Honorable Member for West Grand Bahama.
Mr. Deputy, I'd like to move for the adjournment or for the suspension for the lunch break to return at 3 o'clock this afternoon.
Is there a seconder? It has been moved and seconded that the business of the House be suspended to 3 p.m. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those opposed will stand. The motion is carried. The business of the House stands suspended to 3 p.m.